The Grand Aurora Hotel looked like something out of a fairy tale that Friday evening. Every corner of the massive ballroom sparkled under the glow of enormous crystal chandeliers. The marble floors were so polished you could practically see your reflection in them. Women in expensive gowns that probably cost more than a car glided across the room, their jewelry catching the light with every movement. Men in perfectly tailored suits stood in small groups, laughing at jokes that weren't really that funny but seemed important because of who was telling them. This wasn't just any party. This was the annual Harmony Foundation Gala, the kind of event where tickets cost thousands of dollars and the guest list read like a who's who of the city's wealthiest families. Tables draped in silk surrounded a magnificent grand piano that sat center stage like a crown jewel. The whole evening was designed to raise money for the arts, though most people seemed more interested in being seen than actually seeing anything. At the heart of all the attention stood Vincent Laurent, and if you didn't know who he was before tonight, you certainly knew by now. He was impossible to miss. The famous pianist held court near the grand piano like a king on his throne, surrounded by a circle of admirers who hung on his every word. Vincent had just returned from a wildly successful tour across Europe, and the newspapers couldn't stop talking about how he'd brought audiences to tears in Vienna and earned a 15-minute standing ovation in Paris. The thing about performing at the Royal Albert Hall, Vincent was saying to his captivated audience, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who expects everyone to listen, is that you can feel the weight of history in every note. When I played Beethoven there last month, I could almost sense the great composers watching from beyond. The people around him nodded eagerly, making appreciative sounds. A woman in a red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent touched his arm lightly. "You're simply extraordinary, Vincent. We're so fortunate you could perform for us tonight." Vincent smiled in that way successful people do when they're used to compliments, like he was doing them a favor by accepting their praise. He adjusted his expensive watch and continued sharing stories about famous people he'd met and exclusive venues where he'd performed. Nobody seemed to notice or care that he talked only about himself. While all this was happening on one side of the ballroom, a completely different world existed on the other. 23-year-old Christina moved quietly between tables, expertly balancing a silver tray loaded with champagne glasses. Her simple black and white server's uniform was clean and pressed, but it was worlds apart from the designer outfits floating around the room. She'd been working since 6 that morning at the diner downtown, grabbed a quick bus ride across town, and now she was here, serving drinks to people who probably spent more on shoes than she made in a month. But Christina didn't mind the work. She actually liked being busy, liked having something to focus on. It kept her from thinking too much about other things, like the piano sitting silent in her tiny apartment, like the scholarship letter from the National Conservatory that still sat in her drawer, the one she'd never been able to accept, like the dreams she'd had to fold up and put away neatly, like the napkins she arranged on these fancy tables. That had been 5 years ago. 5 years since her whole life took a sharp turn she never saw coming. Christina had been one of the top students at the conservatory, the kind of talent that made professors stop and take notice. She'd practiced 8 hours a day, her fingers flying across the keys until they ached, and she'd loved every single moment of it. Music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. Then her dad got sick. Really sick. Cancer, the kind that requires aggressive treatment and even more aggressive medical bills. Insurance covered some of it, but some might as well have been nothing when the bills kept coming and coming. Her mom worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, but it wasn't enough. Christina had a choice to make, though it didn't really feel like a choice at all. The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses. Her family needed help now, not in 4 years when she graduated, so she withdrew from the conservatory and started working. First 1 job, then 2, then 3. The diner in the mornings, the hotel catering in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a call center when she could grab them. Every paycheck went straight to keeping the lights on and the medical bills from completely drowning them. Her piano became a piece of furniture, something to dust around. She told herself she'd go back to it when things got better, when her dad recovered, when the bills were paid off. But when kept getting further and further away. Tonight, as she refilled water glasses and cleared empty plates, Christina found her gaze drifting to the magnificent grand piano on stage. It was a Steinway, the kind of instrument most pianists dream about playing just once in their lifetime. She wondered how it would feel under her fingers, whether the keys would be responsive or stiff, whether the tone would be as warm as it looked. She caught herself and quickly looked away. No point in wondering about things that weren't for her anymore. The evening rolled along in a blur of champagne refills and cleared appetizer plates. Christina had gotten good at becoming invisible, moving through the crowd like water, there but not really noticed. That's how service work goes at these fancy events. You're supposed to anticipate needs without being seen, exist without existing. She'd mastered it, but then came the moment that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Christina was making her way past Vincent's group, carefully, maneuvering through the tight circle of admirers with her tray. Someone laughed loudly at one of Vincent's stories and shifted backward just as Christina passed. The unexpected movement threw her off balance for just a second. Her elbow bumped Vincent's arm, not hard, but enough that a few drops of red wine splashed from his glass onto the sleeve of his clearly expensive white shirt. Time seemed to slow down. Christina's stomach dropped as she watched the dark red droplets spread across the pristine white fabric. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she gasped, immediately reaching for a napkin from her tray. "I'm so sorry, sir, please. Let me—" "What on earth?" Vincent's voice cut through the ambient noise of the party like a knife. Conversations around them stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. "How incredibly clumsy. Look what you've done." Christina's face burned hot with embarrassment as every eye in that section of the ballroom focused on her. "I'm truly sorry, sir. If you'll just let me—" "Do they just hire anyone these days?" Vincent continued louder now, making sure his voice carried to the growing audience. He held up his arm, displaying the wine stain like evidence in a trial. "This shirt is custom made. Italian silk. Do you have any idea what this costs?" I'm very sorry," Christina repeated, her voice smaller now. She could feel tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she absolutely refused to cry in front of all these people. "I'll pay for the cleaning. Pay for it?" Vincent laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel small. "I seriously doubt you could afford to even look at the price tag. Perhaps you should consider finding work that doesn't require coordination. Maybe something where you can't damage valuable things or bump into important people." Some of the guests around them laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. That's how it goes with powerful people. Everyone's too worried about offending them to stand up for what's right. Christina's supervisor appeared at her elbow, apologizing profusely to Vincent, promising to handle the situation. Christina felt herself being gently but firmly guided toward the kitchen, away from the guests, away from the scene. Her hands were shaking as she pushed through the swinging doors into the bright, harsh lights of the service area. She set down her tray carefully, took a deep breath, and pressed her palms against the cool stainless steel counter. She would not cry. She would not let some arrogant pianist ruin her night. She needed this job. She needed all her jobs. Her dad's next treatment was in 2 weeks, and the payment plan was already stretched thin. But standing there in that kitchen, surrounded by the clatter of dishes and the hurried conversations of other servers, Christina felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was something deeper. Anger, maybe. Or perhaps just tiredness. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of people like Vincent who thought their talent or their money or their fame gave them the right to treat other people as less than human. She didn't know it yet, but the evening was far from over. And sometimes, when you've been pushed down far enough, the only thing left to do is rise up. Christina stayed in the kitchen for about 15 minutes, helping with dishes and trying to become invisible again. Her supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Rita, who'd always been decent to her, came over and patted her shoulder. "Don't worry about it, honey. These rich folks get worked up over nothing. Just stay back here until things settle down, then you can go back out for the dinner service." Christina nodded, grateful for the kindness. She focused on polishing wine glasses until they sparkled, letting the repetitive motion calm her nerves. Through the kitchen doors, she could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing, the rise and fall of conversation and laughter. It was like nothing had happened out there. For them, it was just a minor disruption in an otherwise perfect evening. For her, it was another reminder of exactly where she stood in the world. Then the room went quiet in that particular way that means someone important is about to speak. Christina glanced toward the doors as one of the other servers pushed through. "They're about to start the main entertainment," the server whispered excitedly. "Vincent Laurent is going to play. This is why everyone's really here." Despite everything, Christina felt a flutter of curiosity. She'd heard Vincent's recordings before, back when she was still at the conservatory. He was technically brilliant, no question about that. His fingers could move faster than seemed humanly possible, hitting every note with machine-like precision. The professors had played his performances as examples of technical mastery. But Christina had always felt something was missing, though she'd never been quite sure what. Rita noticed her looking toward the doors. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Stand in the back and watch if you want. Just stay out of sight." Christina slipped through the service entrance and positioned herself in the shadows near the back wall where the lighting didn't quite reach. From here she could see everything but wouldn't be noticed. The ballroom had transformed into a concert hall. Guests had taken their seats at the round tables, all facing the stage where the grand piano waited. The chandeliers had been dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated the instrument. A man in an expensive suit stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's featured performer." He needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Fresh from his triumphant European tour, having graced the stages of the world's most prestigious concert halls, please welcome the incomparable Vincent Laurent. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Vincent walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He wore a fresh shirt now, Christina noticed. Someone had probably rushed to get him a new one. He waved to the crowd, sat at the piano bench, and adjusted it with practiced ease. The room fell into an expectant hush. Then he began to play. Christina recognized the piece immediately. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beloved and challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. It was the kind of music that could make you feel everything at once, joy and sorrow and longing all mixed together. At least it could when it was played right. Vincent's fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and accuracy. Every note was exactly where it should be. The timing perfect, the dynamics technically correct. The audience watched in rapt attention, clearly impressed. Several people had their phones out, recording the performance. This would probably be all over social media by tomorrow. But Christina stood in her shadowy corner, her arms crossed, and felt a growing sense of sadness. Yes, Vincent was talented. Yes, he hit every note perfectly. But there was something hollow about it, like watching a beautifully painted picture of food when what you really wanted was to taste something real. The music was perfect, but it didn't feel like anything. It was like Vincent was showing off what his fingers could do rather than sharing what his heart felt. She thought about her old professor, Mr. Chen, who used to say that technique was just the beginning. Anyone can learn to hit the right notes, he'd tell his students. But making people feel the music, making them understand what the composer was trying to say, that's the real art. That's what separates someone who plays piano from a true musician. The piece built to its famous climax, Vincent's hands crossing over each other in the complex passages, and the audience leaned forward in their seats. When he struck the final chord and the sound faded into silence, there was a brief moment of stillness before the ballroom erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping enthusiastically. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Vincent stood and bowed deeply, once, twice, 3 times, soaking in the adoration. Christina remained still, watching. She couldn't help but feel that something important was missing, but who was she to judge? She was just a waitress now. She hadn't played in years. Maybe she'd forgotten what good music really sounded like. Vincent returned to the microphone, holding up his hands to quiet the continuing applause. Thank you so much," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "You're too kind. I'm truly honored to play for such a distinguished audience tonight." More applause. Vincent waited for it to die down, that smile still on his face. But then his expression shifted into something else, something that made Christina's stomach tighten with a familiar dread. "I dedicate this performance," Vincent continued, his voice taking on a different tone. To all those who truly appreciate the finer things in life. You see, music like this, real classical music, it's not for everyone. He paused, letting his words sink in. It requires years of training, access to the best teachers, natural talent that you're simply born with. These things cannot be taught to just anyone who wants to learn. There's a certain level of refinement, of breeding, if you will, that's necessary to truly understand and perform great music. The room had gone very quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. This was uncomfortable silence. People shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances, but nobody spoke up. Vincent's eyes swept across the room, and whether by accident or design, they landed on the back corner where Christina stood. Some people are simply meant to serve, he said, and though he didn't point, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. While others are meant to create, to inspire, to elevate humanity through their art. That's just the natural order of things. Christina felt like she'd been slapped. Heat rushed to her face, but this time it wasn't just embarrassment. It was anger, pure and simple. How dare he? How dare this arrogant man who'd probably never struggled for anything in his entire privileged life stand there and say that some people were just naturally meant to be less than others? She thought about her father, lying in that hospital bed fighting for his life. She thought about her mother, working night shifts until her feet ached just to keep the family afloat. She thought about herself, playing piano in a cramped practice room at 5 in the morning because it was the only time she could get it to herself. Her fingers stiff with cold because they couldn't afford to heat the building properly. Were they less refined? Less worthy of creating beautiful things? The audience's applause was more scattered this time, less enthusiastic. People seemed unsure how to respond to Vincent's speech, but most of them clapped anyway, because that's what you do at these events. You clap for the famous person even when they say things that make you uncomfortable. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman stood up from one of the front tables. Christina recognized her from the photos in the event program. It was Helen Chen, the founder and president of the Harmony Foundation, the very organization hosting this gala. She was in her 70s with silver hair pulled back elegantly, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of not taking nonsense from anyone. How fascinating. "Vincent," Helen said, her voice cutting through the awkward silence like a knife through butter. She wasn't yelling, but somehow everyone could hear her perfectly. "I've always held a rather different view. I believe that music belongs to anyone with passion and dedication, regardless of their background or current circumstances." Vincent's confident smile faltered just a bit. "Well, of course, I didn't mean to suggest—" "I think you meant exactly what you said," Helen interrupted smoothly. She turned and her sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on Christina, still frozen in her spot by the back wall. "You there, young lady? You've been watching the performance very intently all evening. I noticed you during the piece. You weren't just listening. You were really hearing it, weren't you?" Christina's heart began to pound so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Every single person in that ballroom turned to look at her. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but here. I was just... Christina stammered. "Do you play piano?" Helen asked directly, her tone kind but firm. Christina could have lied. She could have said no and retreated back into the kitchen and let this whole nightmare evening end. But something about Helen's eyes, something about the way this woman was looking at her like she actually mattered, like her answer was important, made Christina tell the truth. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "I used to." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Vincent was staring at her now with an expression somewhere between disbelief and offense. Helen smiled, and it was a smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Then would you do us the honor?" Helen said, gesturing toward the stage, toward that beautiful grand piano that suddenly seemed both terrifyingly close and impossibly far away, "of sharing something with us this evening?" The room exploded into murmurs. This was not how these events went. Servers didn't perform. The carefully planned program didn't include surprises from the help. Christina saw Rita peeking through the kitchen doors, her eyes wide with concern. She saw Vincent's face turning red. She saw hundreds of wealthy, powerful people staring at her, waiting to see what she would do. And in that moment, Christina made a choice. Christina stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once. This was insane. She couldn't do this. She was wearing a server's uniform. She hadn't played a real piano in 5 years. Her fingers weren't ready. She'd embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people. She'd probably lose her job. What was she thinking? But then another thought pushed through all the noise in her head. It was her father's voice from years ago, back when she was 12 and terrified before her first real recital. "Christina," he'd said, holding both her hands in his. "Scared and excited feel almost the same in your body. Your heart pounds either way. The difference is all in your head, so you get to choose which one it is." She took a breath, then another. She looked at Helen Chen, who was still watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. She looked at Vincent, whose expression had shifted from shock to something that looked almost like amusement, like he was watching a joke unfold that only he understood. He clearly thought she was about to humiliate herself, and he was going to enjoy every second of it. That decided it. Christina stepped forward out of the shadows. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. She could hear fragments of conversations as she walked. Is she really going to play? This is highly irregular. Poor girl's going to embarrass herself. Someone should stop this. Rita caught her eye from the kitchen doorway, her expression torn between worry and something that might have been hope. Christina gave her a small nod. "I'm okay. I've got this." Even though she had no idea if that was true. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever. Her legs didn't quite feel like her own. Every eye in the room followed her movement. Some people looked curious, others uncomfortable. A few seemed genuinely interested. She passed tables full of people who'd paid thousands of dollars to be here. People who probably thought they knew exactly how this evening would go, and certainly didn't expect entertainment from the waitstaff. When she reached the stage steps, Helen was there, offering her hand. Up close, the older woman's eyes were kind. "Don't let anyone make you feel small, dear," Helen whispered, just loud enough for Christina to hear. "Show them what you've got." Christina climbed the steps. The spotlight was bright and hot. She could feel sweat starting to form on her forehead. The piano waited, magnificent and intimidating. She'd dreamed about playing an instrument like this back at the conservatory. Now here she was, about to play it in front of hundreds of people while wearing a catering uniform. Vincent was still on stage, standing near the microphone. "Really?" he said, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "This is quite the spectacle. I hope everyone understands that playing piano isn't something you just do casually. It takes years of dedicated practice, proper training, the right touch." He looked at Christina with barely concealed condescension. Perhaps just something simple? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, maybe? A few people in the audience laughed uncomfortably. Christina felt her face flush hot, but she didn't respond. She couldn't afford to let him get in her head. Not now. She walked past Vincent to the piano bench and sat down. The piano was even more beautiful up close. The keys seemed to glow under the spotlight. Christina reached up and slowly, deliberately, removed her white serving gloves. She set them carefully on the edge of the piano. Her hands looked different now, exposed. Her fingers showed the evidence of years of work, small scars and calluses from burns in the diner kitchen, rough patches from constant washing and cleaning. But they also showed something else. The calluses on her fingertips weren't from kitchen work. They were older, deeper, the kind that only came from thousands of hours on piano keys. Someone in the audience noticed. She heard a woman whisper, "Look at her hands." Christina adjusted the bench, testing the distance. She set her feet properly on the floor. She let her hands hover over the keys for just a moment, remembering the feeling. It had been so long. What if she'd forgotten? What if her fingers didn't remember what her brain told them to do? Then she let her hands rest on the keys and something clicked into place. It was like coming home after a very long trip. The ivory was smooth and cool under her fingertips. The weight of the keys felt right. This was a good piano. Maybe the best she'd ever touched. The room had gone completely silent now. Even Vincent had stopped talking and moved to the side of the stage, his arms crossed, waiting to see her fail. Christina closed her eyes. She thought about what to play. She could pick something simple and safe, prove she could play a little and leave it at that, or she could take a real risk. Play something that would either prove Vincent completely wrong or prove him completely right. She made her choice. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, the kind of piece that professional pianists spent months preparing for concerts, the kind of piece that could destroy you if you weren't ready for it. Her father had always loved this piece. She'd been working on it right before everything fell apart, right before she had to leave the conservatory. She'd never quite finished learning it. But maybe that didn't matter anymore. Christina's fingers found the opening notes. Soft, gentle, almost questioning. The sound that came from the piano was pure and clear. She felt the vibration through the bench, through her whole body. This was why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not because of the applause or the prestige or any of that, but because of this feeling, this connection between her fingers and the keys and the sound that filled the air. She moved into the piece, her hands beginning to dance across the keyboard. The ballroom seemed to disappear. The spotlight, the audience, Vincent, all of it faded away. There was only the music and the story it told. Chopin had written this piece during a time of political upheaval in his homeland. It spoke of longing and loss, of beauty and struggle. Christina understood those feelings now in a way she couldn't have 5 years ago. Her fingers flew through the playful middle section, the notes tumbling over each other like water over rocks. This was the dangerous part technically, where it was easy to stumble, to let the speed get away from you. But her hands remembered. They remembered everything. 5 years of not playing hadn't erased the thousands of hours she'd put in before that. Muscle memory was real, and hers was strong. She poured everything into the music. Every early morning shift at the diner when she was so tired she could barely stand. Every time she'd walked past a music store and heard a piano playing inside and had to force herself to keep walking. Every night sitting by her father's hospital bed, holding his hand, trying to be strong. Every dream she'd folded up and put away. All of it went into her fingers, into the keys, into the sound that filled the Grand Aurora Hotel's ballroom. The piece moved into the darker middle section, full of turbulent emotions and technical challenges. Her left hand played the deep, rolling bass notes while her right hand wove intricate melodies above. This was where you could tell if someone really understood the piece or was just playing notes. The emotions had to be real. You couldn't fake this part. Christina wasn't faking anything. She felt every note. The sadness of dreams, deferred. The anger at unfairness. The hope that somehow, someday, things might be different. The love for her family that made all the sacrifices worth it. The grief for the girl she used to be and the uncertainty about who she was now. It was all there in the music, raw and honest and real. She was vaguely aware that something had changed in the room. The energy was different, but she couldn't focus on that now. The piece was building toward its infamous climax, the part that had humbled countless professional pianists. The coda. Her hands moved in a blur. The notes came faster and faster, building in intensity and volume. This was the part where you either had the technique and stamina or you didn't. There was no faking it, no taking shortcuts. The piece demanded everything. You had every ounce of skill and emotion and physical strength. Christina's arms were starting to ache. Her fingers were moving so fast she couldn't think about individual notes anymore. She could only feel the music, trust her training, trust the thousands of hours of practice from years ago. The piano sang, under her hands the sound filling every corner of the massive ballroom, and then, after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, she was in the final section, the beautiful, heartbreaking conclusion. The music softened, became gentle again, like it was at the beginning but somehow different now, changed by everything that had come before. There was wisdom in these final notes, acceptance, peace. Christina played the last chord and let it ring out, her foot holding down the sustain pedal. The sound gradually faded into silence. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, her hands still resting on the keys, not quite ready to come back to reality. Then she heard it. At first she thought maybe she was imagining it. But no, it was real. The sound started small but grew rapidly. Applause. Not the polite, expected applause that Vincent had received. This was different. This was genuine, stunned, amazed. Christina opened her eyes and slowly turned around. The entire ballroom was on its feet. Every single person. They were clapping so hard some people's hands had to hurt. She saw faces in the crowd and they looked different than before. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. The woman in the red dress who'd fawned over Vincent earlier was clapping with her hands raised above her head. Christina's eyes found Vincent. He was still standing at the side of the stage, but his arms were no longer crossed. He stood there motionless, his face completely pale, his expression unreadable. Helen Chen was walking toward the stage, and when Christina saw her face, saw the tears streaming down the older woman's cheeks, something inside her finally broke. Christina started to cry too, right there on stage in front of everyone. She couldn't help it. 5 years of holding everything in, of being strong, of pushing down who she really was, it all came flooding out. The applause seemed to go on forever. Christina stood there on the stage, tears streaming down her face, completely overwhelmed. She wasn't sure what to do with her hands. She wasn't sure where to look. This wasn't something she'd ever prepared for. In all her years of training at the conservatory, she'd imagined performing in front of audiences, but never like this. Never in a server's uniform. Never after 5 years away from the piano. Never after being humiliated just an hour earlier by someone who thought she was nobody. Helen Chen reached the stage and climbed the steps with surprising energy for someone her age. She walked straight to Christina and took both her hands in her own. Up close, Christina could see that the older woman's eyes were red from crying. "My dear girl," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "That was absolutely extraordinary. I've attended hundreds of concerts in my life, and I can count on one hand the times I've been moved like that." Christina tried to speak, but her voice caught. She managed a whispered, "Thank you." Helen squeezed her hands gently. "Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" The words came tumbling out, all the things Christina had kept bottled up for so long. She told Helen about the National Conservatory, about her scholarship, about being at the top of her class. She told her about her father's cancer diagnosis, about the medical bills that never stopped coming, about the impossible choice between her dreams and her family's survival. "I couldn't keep going," Christina said, her voice shaking. "The scholarship covered tuition but not living expenses, and my family needed help. So I withdrew. That was 5 years ago. I haven't really played since. We have a piano at home, but I work 3 jobs and there's never time, and anyway, it just hurt too much to play and remember everything I gave up." The ballroom had gone quiet again. People were leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear this conversation. Christina suddenly realized that in the emotion of the moment, she'd been speaking loud enough for at least the front tables to hear everything. Her private pain was now public knowledge. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but Helen didn't let go of her hands. "You gave up your dreams to take care of your family," she said softly. "That's not something to be ashamed of. That's one of the most beautiful things a person can do." She paused, then raised her voice so the whole room could hear. "This young woman has more genuine artistry in her fingertips than most people develop in a lifetime of privilege and opportunity." What we just heard wasn't just technical skill. It was truth. It was real. More applause rippled through the crowd. Christina saw people nodding, agreeing. She also saw some uncomfortable faces, people who probably recognized themselves in Helen's words about privilege. Then something unexpected happened. Vincent walked across the stage toward them. Christina tensed, not sure what to expect. Was he going to yell at her? Humiliate her again? He stopped a few feet away, and she could see his face clearly now. The arrogance was gone. He looked shaken, almost lost. "I need to apologize," Vincent said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "Not just for spilling wine on you earlier, though that was inexcusable." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "For everything I said. About some people being meant to serve while others create. About natural order and breeding and all of that." He looked directly at Christina. "I've been incredibly fortunate my entire life. I grew up in a wealthy family. My parents could afford the best teachers from the time I was 5 years old. I've never had to choose between music and anything else because I've never had to choose between anything. Everything was always available to me." The room was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. This was clearly not what anyone expected from Vincent Laurent, the famously confident, some might say arrogant pianist. I've spent years perfecting technique, Vincent continued, learning to play every note correctly, hitting the right tempo, executing difficult passages flawlessly. And I thought that was what made someone a great musician. But tonight you showed me something I've been missing. His voice got quieter. You showed me the difference between playing music and feeling it. Between performing and actually saying something that matters. Christina didn't know what to say. She'd expected many things tonight, but a genuine apology from Vincent Laurent wasn't one of them. What you just played, Vincent said, that's what music is supposed to be. You took one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire and made it mean something, made it real. I've played that same piece 100 times and never once did I make anyone feel what you just made this room feel. He shook his head. I've been so focused on being the best, on being famous, on proving I'm better than everyone else that I forgot why any of this matters in the first place. He extended his hand to Christina. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. His handshake was firm, respectful, nothing like the dismissive way he'd looked at her earlier. You have a gift, Vincent said, a real one. Not just the ability to play difficult music, though, you clearly have that, but the ability to connect with people through music, to make them feel something true. That's rare, that's precious, and I'm genuinely sorry that circumstances forced you to put that gift aside. Christina found her voice. Thank you, she managed. That means a lot. The applause started again, even louder this time. People were standing up again, clapping not just for the performance now, but for this moment, this genuine human exchange happening on stage. Even some of the people who'd laughed at Vincent's cruel jokes earlier were clapping. Perhaps feeling guilty, perhaps just caught up in the moment. Helen Chen stepped forward, commanding attention without even trying. The Harmony Foundation was created 20 years ago with a specific mission, she announced to the room. We exist to nurture exceptional musical talent regardless of economic circumstances. We've helped hundreds of young musicians over the years, but clearly we've failed in some cases. She turned to Christina. We failed you. You should never have had to choose between your education and your family's well-being. That's exactly the kind of situation our foundation was meant to prevent. Christina's heart was pounding. Where was this going? I'd like to rectify that mistake right now, Helen continued. Christina, the Harmony Foundation would like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your training at the National Conservatory. Not just tuition, but a living stipend as well. Enough to support yourself and contribute to your family's expenses so you don't have to work 3 jobs while trying to study. Christina felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I don't understand, she stammered. It's quite simple, Helen said with a warm smile. You're exactly the kind of talent our foundation exists to support. We have the resources. You have the ability and the passion. Let us help you finish what you started 5 years ago. Tears were streaming down Christina's face again, but these were different tears. My father, she said. He's still in treatment. The bills, we'll work it out, Helen said firmly. That's what the foundation does. We'll make sure your family is taken care of while you complete your education. Your father wouldn't want you to give up your dreams forever because of his illness. I'm certain of that. Christina thought about her dad, probably asleep in his hospital bed right now, the TV on low, her mother dozing in the uncomfortable chair beside him. She thought about how proud he'd been when she got her first scholarship, how heartbroken he'd looked when she told him she was withdrawing. I gave up my dream so you could live, she'd told him then. That's not a sacrifice. That's an easy choice, but he'd cried anyway. And she'd known it wasn't just about his illness. It was about hating that his sickness had cost his daughter her future. He'd want this, Christina said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Then louder, yes, I accept. Thank you. Thank you so much, the ballroom erupted. People were on their feet again, clapping and cheering. Some were crying openly. This had turned into something none of them had expected when they bought their expensive tickets to a fancy charity gala. This was real. This mattered. Vincent stepped forward again. I'd like to add something if I may, he said. Helen nodded for him to continue. I'd like to fund a new initiative through the Harmony Foundation, an annual competition and concert series specifically for musicians who've had to interrupt their training for economic reasons. Bring them back, give them a platform, help them restart their careers. He looked at Christina. And if you'll agree, I'd like you to be our first featured artist. A full concert, properly promoted at a major venue. Christina could barely process what was happening. An hour ago, she'd been clearing plates and trying not to cry in the kitchen. Now she had a scholarship, a concert offer, and a room full of wealthy people looking at her like she mattered. But I'm not ready, she protested. I haven't performed in 5 years. I'd need time to prepare, to practice, so take time, Vincent said. Take 6 months, take a year. However long you need. This isn't about rushing you. It's about giving you the opportunity you deserve. Helen placed a hand on Christina's shoulder. What do you say, dear? Christina looked out at the audience. She saw Rita standing by the kitchen doors, tears running down her face, giving her a thumbs up. She saw the woman in the red dress dabbing her eyes with a napkin. She saw dozens of faces, most of them strangers, but all of them looking at her with something she'd never expected to see from people like this. Respect. Genuine respect. She thought about her piano at home, silent and dusty. She thought about her father's face when she'd play for him as a child. She thought about her professor, Mr. Chen, who'd told her she had something special. She thought about all the mornings she'd woken up exhausted from her jobs and pushed down the ache of missing music. Yes, Christina said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I'd be honored. The applause was deafening. And for the first time in 5 years, Christina felt like maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to dream again. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. After Christina left the stage, she was surrounded by people wanting to talk to her, to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were by her performance. The same people who'd been sipping champagne and ignoring the servers an hour earlier now treated her like she was someone important. It was overwhelming and strange and honestly a little uncomfortable. Rita found her in the crowd and pulled her into a tight hug. Girl, I can't believe what just happened, she whispered. That was incredible. I'm so happy for you. Her voice cracked a little. We're going to miss you at the hotel, though. Christina hugged her back, realizing she was going to miss Rita, too. And the other servers who'd become friends over the past few years. They'd covered for each other during hard shifts, shared tips when someone was short on rent, celebrated small victories together. They'd been there for her when she had nobody else. Several guests asked to take photos with Christina. One woman, a music critic for a major newspaper, asked if she could write a story about her. A man who owned a recording studio gave her his business card. When you're ready, he said, I'd love to work with you. It was all so surreal. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the evening. Helen Chen pulled Christina aside to a quiet corner and sat down with her, away from the crowd. I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to, Helen said gently. This scholarship returning to the conservatory, it's going to be hard work. You'll be starting again after 5 years away. Your classmates will be younger than you. Some of them might resent the attention you're getting. And the practice, the dedication required, it's intense. Christina nodded. I know. I remember how hard it was before. It might be harder now, Helen continued. You've lived a different life these past 5 years. You've had responsibilities most music students never have to think about. That changes you. You'll see things differently than your classmates. That can be lonely sometimes. I understand, Christina said. And she did. She wasn't the same girl who'd left the conservatory 5 years ago. She'd grown up fast, learned things about the world that couldn't be taught in a classroom. She'd learned about sacrifice and resilience and what it meant to keep going even when everything felt impossible. Helen smiled. Good. Because I think those experiences, hard as they were, they're part of what makes your playing so powerful. You've lived. You understand struggle and loss and hope in a way that someone who's only ever known privilege and comfort simply can't. That comes through in your music. Don't lose that. Before Christina left that night, Helen made sure she had all the information she needed. Phone numbers, email addresses, the name of someone at the foundation who would help her with all the paperwork and logistics. Call your father tonight, Helen said. Tell him what happened. He should hear it from you first before it ends up online. Christina hadn't even thought about that, but sure enough, when she checked her phone during the bus ride home, she found dozens of notifications. Videos of her performance were already circulating on social media. Someone had titled one, Waitress Silences Arrogant Pianist with Stunning Performance. It had been viewed thousands of times already, and it had only been posted an hour ago. She got home close to midnight. The apartment was quiet. Her mother was at the hospital staying overnight with her father, like she did most nights. Christina sat on the couch for a few minutes, still wearing her work uniform, trying to process everything that had happened. It felt like a dream. Like maybe she'd wake up tomorrow and find out none of it was real. But the business cards in her pocket were real. The messages on her phone were real. The ache in her fingers from playing such a demanding piece after years away, that was definitely real. Christina walked over to the piano in the corner of their small living room. She'd covered it with a sheet months ago. Unable to bear looking at it every day, she pulled the sheet off now, revealing the old upright piano that had belonged to her grandmother. It wasn't fancy. The finish was worn and some of the keys stuck a little, but it had been her first piano, the one where she'd learned to play as a child. She sat down and played a few scales. The sound was tinny compared to the magnificent Steinway from earlier, but it was home. She played a simple piece, one of the first she'd ever learned, and found herself smiling. Tomorrow she'd call the hospital and tell her father everything. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out how to balance returning to school with her family's needs. Tomorrow she'd begin the hard work of becoming the musician she'd always dreamed of being, but tonight she just played for herself. The next few weeks were chaotic. Christina's performance went viral in a way none of them expected. The video had millions of views. News outlets picked up the story. Waitress with Hidden Talent Stuns Charity Gala read one headline.
Famous pianist humbled by server's incredible performance, said another.
Christina did a few interviews, though she tried to keep them brief. She didn't want to become famous for the drama. She wanted to be known for her music. Her father cried when she told him about the scholarship. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry you had to give up your dreams because of me." Christina held his hand and reminded him that she'd never regretted her choice. "I'd do it again," she told him. "But now I get to do both. Take care of you and follow my dreams. That's more than most people ever get." Returning to the conservatory was exactly as hard as Helen had warned. Christina was older than most of her classmates by several years. Some of them recognized her from the viral videos and treated her like a celebrity. Others seemed resentful of the attention she received. And the work itself was brutal. Her technique had suffered during her time away. Her fingers tired more easily. She had to rebuild stamina and precision that she'd once taken for granted, but she also had something now that she hadn't had before. Perspective. When she played, she wasn't just executing notes on a page. She was telling stories, expressing emotions, connecting with something real. Her professors noticed. "There's a depth to your playing now," Mr. Chen told her during one lesson. "A maturity. You've lived through difficult things and you're not afraid to let that show in your music. That's rare, especially in someone your age." Vincent kept his promise about the concert series. The new initiative, which the foundation named Second Chances, launched 6 months after that night at the gala. They held auditions for musicians who'd had to interrupt their training for financial or personal reasons. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people applied, each with their own story of deferred dreams and hard choices. Christina performed in the inaugural concert. She played the same Chopin piece along with several others, in front of a sold-out audience at a prestigious concert hall downtown. Her parents were in the front row. Her father was thinner than before, still fighting his illness, but his eyes shone with pride. Her mother held his hand and cried through the entire performance. Vincent was there too, sitting in the audience instead of on stage. After the concert, he came backstage to congratulate her. "You're only going to get better," he told her. "And I'm going to work on becoming half the musician you already are." "You're good too," Christina said generously. "You just had to remember why you started playing in the first place." "Fair point," Vincent acknowledged with a smile that was actually genuine. Not the practice performer's smile she'd seen that first night. "We should collaborate sometime. I think we could learn from each other," Christina agreed. Over the next year, they did several performances together, which surprised a lot of people. The press loved the story of the formerly arrogant pianist and the waitress who'd humbled him, becoming colleagues and eventually friends. But for Christina and Vincent, it wasn't about the story. It was about the music. Christina graduated from the conservatory 2 years later at the top of her class. She received offers from orchestras and venues around the country. Some of them were prestigious and would have launched her into immediate fame, but she chose something different. She joined the faculty at a music school that specifically served low-income students, kids who loved music but whose families couldn't afford expensive lessons. "I want to teach," she told Helen when explaining her decision. "I want to find the next kid like me and make sure they don't have to give up their dreams just because life gets hard." Helen understood. "You're going to change lives," she said. "Not just through your performing, though you should keep doing that too, but by showing young people that talent exists everywhere, not just in wealthy families with connections, that where you start doesn't determine where you end up." Christina still performed regularly. She played concerts, recorded albums, and yes, became somewhat famous in classical music circles. But what she loved most was teaching, finding that spark in a young student's eyes when they finally understood a difficult concept, watching a shy kid gain confidence through music, helping families navigate the complicated world of music education and scholarships. She never forgot that night at the Grand Aurora Hotel, how it felt to be dismissed and humiliated, how it felt to take a risk when everything in her wanted to stay safe and invisible, how it felt to play music that came from somewhere deep and true inside her, how it felt when people really listened and heard not just the notes but the story behind them. And she never forgot the most important lesson from that evening: that your circumstances don't define your worth, that talent and passion exist everywhere, in servers and students and people working 3 jobs just to survive, that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts are hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone to give them a chance to shine. Years later, when her own students felt discouraged or overwhelmed, Christina would tell them her story. Not to brag, but to remind them that the path forward isn't always straight. Sometimes you have to take detours. Sometimes you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you have to wait longer than you wanted. But if you hold on to what matters, if you remember why you started, if you're willing to be brave when the moment comes, then the detours become part of your story. And your story, with all its struggles and setbacks, is what makes your music real. That night at the gala, Christina had been afraid, but she played anyway, and that made all the difference. 5 years had passed since that magical night at the Grand Aurora Hotel. Christina now stood in front of her own classroom at the Lincoln Community Music Academy, watching 12 young faces stare back at her with varying degrees of excitement and nervousness. These weren't the typical music students from wealthy families. These were kids from the neighborhood, kids whose parents worked multiple jobs, kids who'd never imagined they could learn to play classical music. "Who can tell me what makes music special?" Christina asked, settling onto the piano bench. A small hand shot up immediately. "It sounds pretty," offered Maya, a 7-year-old whose mother cleaned office buildings at night to pay for these lessons. "That's part of it," Christina smiled. "What else?" "It makes you feel things," said Danny, a shy 10-year-old who'd been coming for 6 months. His grandmother brought him every week, riding 2 buses each way because she believed music would keep him out of trouble. "Exactly. Music is a language that speaks to your heart before it reaches your brain." Christina placed her hands on the keys. "Today I want to tell you a story. Not with words, but with music. And then you're going to tell me what story you heard." She began to play a simple melody, one she'd composed herself. It started soft and uncertain, like a child taking their first steps. Then it grew stronger, more confident. There were stumbles, moments where the melody seemed to fall and pick itself back up. Near the end it soared, triumphant and free. When the last note faded, the room was quiet. Then Maya raised her hand again. It sounded like someone who was scared but got brave. Christina's heart swelled. "That's beautiful, Maya. What made you think that?" "The beginning was all whisper quiet, like when I'm scared to answer in regular school. But then it got louder, like when I remember I actually know the answer." The other kids nodded, understanding exactly what Maya meant. Christina looked around the room at these children who understood struggle, who knew what it meant to feel uncertain about their place in the world. They got it in a way that her former conservatory classmates, for all their technical training, might never fully grasp. "Music tells the truth," Christina said. "Not just any truth, but your truth. The real feelings you have inside, even the ones you might not have words for yet." After class, Christina walked through the school hallways, past bulletin boards covered with student artwork and achievement certificates. The Lincoln Academy wasn't fancy. The piano in her classroom was donated and needed tuning more often than they could afford. The building was old, with radiators that clanged and windows that stuck. But it was alive in a way that some prestigious institutions never managed to be. She stopped by the office to pick up her mail, and found a package waiting. The return address made her smile. Vincent Laurent. Even though they'd become genuine friends over the years, he still insisted on sending formal packages instead of just calling like a normal person. Inside was a newspaper clipping and a handwritten note. The article was from a major music publication, reviewing his latest concert tour. The headline read, "Laurent's Transformation, from Technical Perfection to Emotional Truth." The review praised his newfound ability to connect with audiences, to make them feel something real through his music. Vincent's note was brief. "Thought you'd want to see this. Still learning from that night, you changed everything. P.S. The foundation approved funding for 3 more community music programs. Your proposal for the mobile music classroom got the green light too. We're changing the world one kid at a time." Christina folded the note carefully. The mobile classroom had been her dream for 2 years now. A converted van that could bring music lessons directly to neighborhoods where kids couldn't travel to schools like Lincoln Academy. It would serve children in rural areas, kids in homeless shelters, young people in hospitals. Music for everyone, no matter where they were or what their circumstances looked like. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Dad's latest test results came back. All clear, 2 years cancer-free. Doctor says he's doing great. Can't wait to hear about your day. Christina leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed with gratitude. Her father had beaten the cancer. The medical bills were finally manageable. Her family was stable and healthy, and she was doing work that mattered, work that fed her soul every single day. "Miss Christina?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts. She opened her eyes to see Tommy, one of her newer students, standing in the hallway with his violin case. "Hey, Tommy, did you forget something in the classroom?" The 8-year-old shook his head. "I wanted to ask you something. My mom says music lessons are expensive and maybe I should quit to help save money, but I really love playing violin. Is it okay to want something even if it costs money?" Christina knelt down to Tommy's eye level. This conversation happened more often than she wished. Kids who felt guilty for wanting things their families had to sacrifice to provide. Kids who learned too young to put their dreams aside. "Tommy, can I tell you a secret? When I was about your age, I worried about the same thing. I loved piano so much, but I knew it was hard for my family to pay for lessons." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really, but you're a real pianist now." "I am. And you know what I learned? The people who love us want us to follow our dreams even when it's hard. Your mom brings you here every week because she sees how happy music makes you. That's worth more to her than money. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm wasting their money?" Christina remembered being that age, measuring her worth by how perfectly she could play a piece, thinking she had to earn her place at the piano bench. "Tommy, you know what makes someone good at music? It's not playing every note perfectly. It's loving it enough to keep trying, even when it's difficult, and you already have that." She stood up and gestured toward the window, where they could see parents arriving to pick up their children. "See all those families out there? They're not here because their kids are already perfect musicians. They're here because they believe music will make their children's lives richer, happier, more complete. That includes you." Tommy smiled, the worry leaving his face. "Thanks, Miss Christina. I'm going to practice extra hard this week." As he ran off to meet his mother, Christina thought about all the conversations like this she'd had over the years. Kids who needed permission to dream. Children who'd been told, directly or indirectly, that certain things weren't for people like them. Her job wasn't just teaching scales and rhythm. It was showing these young people that they belonged in the world of music, that their voices mattered, that their dreams were valid. That evening, Christina sat at her own piano at home. She'd bought a better one after landing her teaching position, though nothing as grand as the Steinway from that famous night. She was working on a new piece, something she'd been composing for the mobile classroom's inaugural concert. It needed to be something special, something that would speak to kids who'd never heard classical music before, something that would make them think, "I could do that too." The melody came slowly, built from fragments of songs she'd heard her students humming, rhythms from the neighborhoods where they lived, harmonies that felt both sophisticated and accessible. This wasn't music for critics or fellow musicians. This was music for Maya and Danny and Tommy and all the other children who deserved to see themselves reflected in beautiful sounds. As she played, Christina thought about the ripple effect of that night 5 years ago. How one moment of courage had led to her scholarship, which led to her teaching position, which led to Vincent's foundation initiatives, which would now reach hundreds more children through the mobile classroom program. How Helen Chen's willingness to see potential in an unexpected place had created opportunities for so many others. She thought about Vincent, too. How his public awakening that night had influenced other established musicians to examine their own attitudes and privileges. Several major music schools had revamped their scholarship programs. The classical music world was slowly becoming more inclusive, more welcoming to talent regardless of its packaging. But mostly she thought about her students, these remarkable children who came to her classroom carrying their own dreams and fears and potential. They reminded her every day why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the applause or the recognition, but for the pure joy of creating something beautiful, of connecting with other human beings through sound and emotion. Christina finished playing her new composition and sat quietly for a moment. Tomorrow she'd teach it to her students. Next month they'd perform it from the mobile classroom in neighborhoods across the city. And somewhere in those audiences would be children hearing live classical music for the first time. Children who might see themselves on that small stage and think, maybe I could do that too. The circle would continue to grow, one student at a time, one performance at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And it had all started with a young woman in a server's uniform who decided to sit down at a piano and play her truth for the world to hear.